there really are three schools of thought around negotiations in general, and it's broken down into win-win, winner take all, and walk the line. These are our categories, which basically prescribes to the context of which you are negotiating. Win-win in a very amicable manner of like a peace treaty, a winner take all and a very high stakes, like a negotiation around a hostage. And the third school of thought around really walking the line and the approach and the tactics and the assertiveness that you engage in around this discussion. But obviously, Mike, this is just a quick way to kind of chalk the field. And I think from our side, the commercial negotiation really encompasses all of these based on the context and who we're speaking to.
Yeah, commercial negotiation is kind of the term we're using to define challengers' perspective on it. At the end of the day, every sales organization needs to engage in some form of bargaining to close deals, right? And there's many models and frameworks out there for bargaining and negotiations. Like, pick one, they're all great. Like, they all have varying degrees of effectiveness and use cases, but few of them account for the specificity of B2B sales negotiations, right? The full scope of factors that can mean the difference between success and leaving lots of value on the table. And that's what we're really interested in talking about here and moving forward as we continue to publish research on the topic.
Yeah, and speaking of research, Mike, I know this has been something that we've talked a lot about, but maybe you could give folks a quick high-level overview of what we've learned so far in our initial findings on this.
Yeah, so initial sort of batch, and this is an ongoing study that we're going to continue to run, and it's going to evolve, but little sample of about 111 folks here in this first batch. Many of you on the line participated, so thank you. We asked sales professionals and sales leaders the sort of the negotiations posture that they take, how the customers on the other side of the table behave, and ultimately, what's important about quote unquote negotiations right now in a B2B context. Vast majority here, 93% are reporting that there's more than one individual involved on the customer side. Now, we know that stakeholder groups are large throughout the process, large buying groups, dynamic, diverse. Same goes here in the final stage of negotiations, right? Like, it's not just kicking it over to one person who's kind of the key negotiator closer, right? We've got a large group. Next one is 50% of the time. So, roughly half here, or exactly half, I should say. The key individuals or the counterparts that we're working with, they're well known. We've actually been working with them for at least a year. So this could be a reflection of, hey, we're doing a lot of negotiating with existing clients on renewals or upsell opportunities, cross-sell, or it could be because like we've got long cycles. But in either case, again, it's not as if we're just the customers turning things over to a key negotiator in the final mile. Procurement may be involved, but it's still a group of known individuals that know you and will presumably be working with you for some time to come. So you got to be conscious of that. Two more quick hits that I think round out the story that's unfolding in front of us. Over half of us, 55%, reported to be relatively easy for our customer or prospective customer to walk away from us. Now, what this implies is that we're perhaps not as differentiated as we thought we were. So we might not have as much leverage in these negotiations.
What do you mean?
Yeah, it's a little scary, but and then the last one is fewer than half, 43% of negotiations are actually happening live. And that's not necessarily live face-to-face or by phone or by Zoom. Like, it's just live interaction between two human beings. In other words, majority happens like over email or asynchronously or in preparation for those conversations.
Yes.
And that's a key theme that I think we're going to hit on a lot today. And if I see a common thread between the four of these findings, it's that commercial negotiation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen with a designated negotiator. It doesn't happen with any one individual. We know the people. They have leverage just as we do. And a lot of it depends on what we do in preparation for the quote unquote negotiation itself.
Yeah, I think this data, this research, that when I look at it, it comes back to that framework that we showed on the previous page. If you're just engaging entirely in a win-win negotiation, how do you do that and make multiple stakeholders happy? Right? We know about the risk of over-tailoring to individuals, and the same thing is true if you're going to continue to work with them, or 50% of these opportunities you're working with them for at least a year, the winner-take-all mentality isn't really going to resonate either. So trying to find something in the middle based on the context is critical.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think we can talk about negotiations, Mike, without mentioning Never Split the Difference and Chris Voss. It seems to be kind of the preeminent. He seems to be known as one of the preeminent experts on the topic, rightfully so. For folks that haven't read it, he's a former hostage negotiator for the FBI. I've read the book. I love it. If you haven't read it, I would recommend to our audience that you do so. You will definitely take something away from it. I think there's three things that I just quickly wanted to call out, Mike, that I really attached to reading it. First and foremost, one of his sayings is, you fall to the highest level of preparation, to your highest level of preparation. And that very much fits in line with some of the stuff we've talked about throughout this series of challengers prepare differently. And that's really what separates them from the core performer. The second being, it's not how well you speak, but how well you listen that determines your success. Obviously, active listening has been a key component in being a challenger. It doesn't matter if you ask the best question. If you don't listen intently and collect on the nuance, you'll miss the forest for the trees. And then third and finally, if your biggest fear is no, you can't negotiate, which to me is the perfect tee up for constructive tension.
Yep. Yeah, and if we want to take it a step further, I can kind of elaborate a little bit on our perspective here at Challenger as it relates to negotiations. And as we like to do in this webinar series, we use the tempo framework that you see here on the slide, which is kind of the roadmap for the entire series. But I think it also really helps to illustrate our take on negotiations at a high level. Mm-hmm. Typically, we think of negotiations as happening in the quote unquote plan to close stage. And that's true, right? Yeah. We think about a negotiation. We often think about the back and forth from when we delivered our proposal to when we actually close it, haggling about price and getting perfectly worded terms and conditions. At its core, negotiation is about agreeing on an exchange of value for the solution that we're delivering, and for commensurate price and conditions back from our customers. If you click forward there, John, that's late stage negotiations, right? In the late stage negotiations goal, we refer to this as protecting the pie, carving out our value, making sure, again, our solution is sold for commensurate price and conditions. There's an equal value exchange there. Now, that implies that we've done some work up until that point that we're actually trying to protect. So if you click to the next slide, you kind of see the other half of the equation from our perspective at Challenger, and that's the real difference between successful negotiations and ultimately leaving more on the table or losing value. When you get to those late stage negotiations is really all about the work that you've been doing up front all along. It's what you've been doing as you seek out those targets, as you engage prospects and try to reframe their perspective, as you manage that buying group to the point of proposal. We call this sizing the pie. Okay. So if late stage negotiations is protecting the pie, our take on everything happens before then, our early stage strategy, it's called sizing the pie. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about today. That's what we help advise on. And if you look closely at this page, you realize we've been setting ourselves up for success or lack thereof this entire time as we followed our tempo framework throughout this webinar series. So this kind of puts a cap on, I think, a lot of the work we've been doing and talking to you all about for several months now.
Yeah, I love this framework, Mike. And if I put myself in the shoes of some of our audience, they might say, come on, guys, like this is negotiations, this is cost of doing business, this is what we got to do. I think what we as Challenger are often interested in is, first of all, the doing something because it's the way it's always been done is not a good enough answer, but also quantifying what that status quo costs. And if we do that and take a step back for not only was it cost an average seller, but what does it cost the broader organization? If we do some simple back of the envelope math, a la Challenger pain calculator, and assume as a rep, you got $1 million annual goal and your average sales price is something like $100,000. That means it takes 10 deals to get your number. If you assume on average, you're given a 15% discount, that's $150,000 in value lost every year that we theoretically, leave on the table, which we could say is a cost of doing business. When you expand that number, you look at it two ways. What's it costing the company? If you got 50 salespeople on your team or in your organization, that's $7.5 million in profitability that you're taking a hit on, which prevents you from reinvesting in the company, reinvesting in you, reinvesting in your peers. I think what makes this even more painful for sales reps is think about the impact on your incentive plan. For many of us that are incentivized accordingly, there's a big difference between being at 115% versus 100% of goal, and simultaneously being at 100% versus 85% of goal. Typically, that's going to affect our multiplier. So obviously, the dollars and cents, this hits the wallet for the company and for individual sellers, so it may be costing us more than we realize. I think we would encourage sellers, if you got a pen and paper right now, do the math for yourself. Right? What's your average discount? What's your average sales price? What's your goal? How do you compare some of the facts and figures we shared here? But we know this is only part of the story, right? There's other ways that we, frankly, give away value through what we call some of these value leaks to avoid. I think what we've seen from some of this early research is there are 5 really common ways this happens. First and foremost, overcommitting or allowing scope creep within the contract in an effort to bring the deal in. You'll agree to whatever at the late stage, just get that deal ATL or above the line, in the door. Promising something that can't be done because, again, you're just predisposition to say yes and to want to do something to make sure the deal comes in. Again, agreeing to an accelerated timeline. I see this play out where we said, hey, we could launch this by X date. Customer drags their feet for 3 weeks and they expect to still deliver it by that date, to which we got to say that was 3 weeks ago, right? Because you've dragged your feet, that date pushes out. The next one here, offering the wrong incentives. I think the face value one that many of us are going to be familiar with and probably have been guilty of at some point early in our careers, hopefully, is customer says, oh, we don't have budget this year. We got everything squashed or we got a pretty tight purse, to which we say, all right, we can offer 10% off. It's like, well, that doesn't solve the problem for the customer. We said it's a budget issue, right? 10% off probably isn't going to move the needle. So offering the wrong incentives without truly understanding what the challenge is. And then finally, accepting T's and C's changes that are not in our best interest.
Yeah, and I think a few of these stand out as like maybe things that have been amplified or magnified in 2020 because of the sort of the post-COVID complex environment that we're in. That last one in particular, for example, like terms and conditions that are not in our best interest. It's, if I think about like invoicing terms, it's never in our best interest to accept less than ideal invoicing terms. But I think in 2019, we might have been willing to say, well, our company policy is net 30, you're asking for net 60, fine. As long as we can get this deal done by the end of December, we'll take net 60 or even net 90. 2019, maybe not a problem. 2020, cash flow is like the critical metric for most businesses to pay attention to right now. It's actually probably in many cases like safer for us to give a little bit of a discount than to accept a 3-month, 90-day net invoicing term. So just something to consider. These things change, but I think a lot of them have been amplified in the post-COVID environment.
Back to ways that we have value leaks in the organization, right? Think about the impact and the drain this places on some of our colleagues elsewhere in the business and how frustrated they have been at us as sellers when we've put them in a position like one of these. So I guess the question that we got to ask here for folks on the line is, which of these are you guilty of? And for many of us, it may be more than one or all of the above, especially when you think 3, 6, 12 months in the past. So hopefully what you've seen here is a clear case for change, is that negotiations as the cost of doing business is costing us more than we may have thought at face value. And there are ways that we leak value out of the organization. And a lot of this, Mike, I think can be solved through more effective and better preparation. But we've got a more robust framework for how to do this effectively, how to truly plan for the close. And we know this is not just a story about negotiations. More broadly, this is a story about value. So first and foremost, how do we confirm the value, negotiate and manage concessions appropriately, leverage the ever-present skill of constructive tension, and prepare both our organization and the customer organization for delivery of the service and of the product to ensure a seamless and profitable experience for both. So with that, let's take each of these one by one. So confirm the value. Real quick, this is an example of a company buying a CRM solution. So when it comes to value, each of the stakeholders are going to extract value from this solution differently. Finance wants to report on accurate data. Sales wants to track seller activity and manage the health of the pipeline. Marketing wants to track volume and impact of marketing generated influence leads. And procurement wants to demonstrate year-on-year savings. That's what they are incentivized on. That's what they are goaled on. So how are we changing and tailoring our message to resonate with procurement, with finance, with whoever the stakeholder that we are talking to? And how are we equipping our mobilizer to do so? We know from the research that only 17% of the buying group's time is spent with the supplier sales rep. So the mobilizer is asked to sell, frankly, more than we do in many situations. So how are we equipping them to have that conversation accordingly? And we'll show you. How is value created in the first place? Well, in its simplest form, value creation can be broken down into either top line growth by increasing gross margin through driving an increase in sales or reducing the cost of goods services, or bottom line savings by reducing expenses or capital required. So the question becomes, what does your solution do? And how can you tailor it appropriately for your mobilizer, for you to articulate this to procurement effectively? Whether it's gross margin by increasing sales or reducing cost of goods sold or driving down expenses and capital required. This is a great framework, some great scripting that I think should be a part of every conversation with procurement, making sure we're prepared for this.
Yeah. Yeah. What we put together here to help folks on the line think through, again, it's not earth shattering here, but it's thinking about, you get mired in the day-to-day in terms of what you sell and what your product or solution does, but step back for a second and realize, okay, what value am I actually creating by selling this to this organization? It's That's one right. of these four things, or maybe more than one of these four things. But this template here, if you're using this sort of to prepare for a conversation with somebody who works in procurement, for example, this template helps you translate your pitch to the language that they speak, which is value creation and value capture. Are we helping them improve along the lines of gross margin? Are we helping them reduce costs and expenses? So,
and it comes back, Mike, to what we talk about in insight design. When we help companies build commercial insight, asking that question, as you well know, so what, when it comes to our differentiators and our value. And if you're talking to procurement, until you're at one of these four categories, you're not there yet.
Right.
Haven't connected the dots effectively for them as a stakeholder.
Right.
So once we've done that, once we've confirmed the value, then we have the opportunity at this, again, late stage, as we mentioned, to negotiate and manage concessions. But really, I should rephrase what I said. This is both the early stage and the late stage negotiation strategy, as you mentioned. So let's talk about early stage first. And I just want to hit on these really quickly, because it's a little bit of who's the, oh my God, what's the old karate movie, The Karate Kid? When he's learning how to wax, or he thinks he's learning how to wax a car and he's actually learning how to fight. We've been talking about how we prepare the organization and engage in those early stage strategy and early stage negotiations this whole time, right? So when you started and identified the best fit for your solution through this concept we introduced in July on reframe potential, defined as the delta between the pain of same and the pain of change, you know this is a good fit, and you know status quo is costing this organization a good deal of time or money. Beyond that, we've engaged in a value-add discovery process. It's not death by 1,000 paper cuts, 1,000 questions. It's prescriptive discovery done the challenger way, with plenty of prep beforehand and a focus on reframing customers' current thinking and delivering value by leading with a unique perspective. Beyond that, it's not about pitching change, which is what 80% of sellers, 80% of commercial organizations focus on. ROI, features and benefits, case studies, asking yes, no questions. It's being more focused on deepening the pain of same, some of the things you see here, cost and risk of doing nothing, stories and anecdotes of other orgs who have faced similar challenges and had similar failures, and asking powerful, thought-provoking questions. Mike, I'll take something that you say verbatim, right? Our job as sellers is to make the pain of same greater than the pain of change. And as you say, that's the whole job. Like, that's it. So we've got to be really focused on this. And if we've done our job accordingly early stage, we've really built that pie out and are in a position to protect it in the late stage negotiations. So once we get into late stage, then what happens? Here are four things that we've identified early on in this research of profiling what some of the highest performers do, on some tactical guidance on what to do and how to do concessions more effectively. First of all, concede to a pattern, be strategic about it. What we expect the customer to ask for and what our company might want in return. Secondly, know when to walk away, what's our bottom line number. Third, of course, this seems obvious, ask for something in return to promote fairness. It's reasonable to ask for something in return. So what's a price concession in exchange for different payment terms, to a comment you made earlier. And then fourth and finally, emphasize what a concession has cost you. This will increase that perceived value of said concession.
Another tool.
Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Can I share the tool we built around this one?
Yeah, I mean, I love this thing. So please do share it. Let me pull it up here.
So everybody will have a copy of this, and we'll make sure it's available to folks. But the idea of mapping out a concession strategy, this is a tool we built. It'll be available in the activation platform, our concession strategy template. This is really just, and you'll see here on the page, it's an illustrative example. Pretend here in this example, you're selling coffee beans to a coffee processor or wholesaler, right? The way this template works is, if you were to download this and fill it out, the top of the page from left to right is effectively your effort in terms of putting yourself in the shoes of your customer and thinking through, all right, what does my customer actually care about here? What are they willing to accept in this negotiation? And then on the bottom, in the darker orange boxes, now that I think about what my customer would be willing to accept, what am I willing to concede? Plain and simple, right? And so this quick example here, like the gist of it is from left to right, my customer, who's a coffee processor and wholesaler across the globe, they care about two things: quality of product and consistency of taste and the product, right? You know, as a commodity provider, what do we care about? Well, we care about avoiding wild price fluctuations, which would kill our margins in a seasonal business. And so where does that put us in terms of this negotiation? Well, first, in terms of what they're willing to accept, and then in terms of what we're willing to concede. And so in this hypothetical example, I won't go through the whole thing, but we actually land on, we can offer a lower base price in exchange for getting the customer to accept a dynamic pricing plan, for example. And we'll also give a quality guarantee so that we can achieve their objectives, consistency, quality, and stability in pricing. And we can achieve ours, which is effectively, again, consistency in pricing so that we can avoid those wild fluctuations and remove the seasonality in our business. So one quick illustrative example. But again, these tools are super, super helpful when you get into these final mile negotiations and you just literally need to sit down and think 3 or 4 steps ahead. What are we willing to give up if we believe the customer is going to accept something, and move forward in a timely manner?
Did I see a subtle chess analogy in there, Mike?
There was we carried the chess analogy from Queen's Gambit forward for you, John. Yeah.
I appreciate that. You've always been a good friend on that one. I do love this. Super tactical, which is exactly the goal here. So in the spirit of moving us along efficiently here and just looking at the clock, obviously ever-present skill of leveraging constructive tension, a template that folks have seen before. Again, most of our audience has been, with 5+ of these sessions. It starts with your preparation. What do you do before the meeting to enable you to create constructive tension in any environment? And really, once you're at this late stage, Mike, it becomes about strategic silence, guiding the customer through that new way forward to your solution, recommendations and guiding questions, and leveraging those powerful requests to drive action and accountability. And it's about execution at the final mile here, not only preparation, but then getting into the moment and executing accordingly.
That's right. Yeah. All of these things are important in the context of building constructive tension. But if we're separating like the things we do the entire time, early stage, sizing the pie, versus the things we might use in the final few days, late stage negotiations, strategic silence, guiding the path forward, powerful requests, commitment to action, very, very powerful.
It's a beautiful thing. All right. Well, then fourth and finally on this one, preparing for delivery. I think it's important for us to look at this in the context of frankly, the golden circle, for those that know Simon Sinek, using that as a starting point of leading with why. First and foremost, can the primary context articulate the why change? to their colleagues. That's why most organizations succeed or fail. Do you start with why or not? And then moving on to the what. The end users understand the solution benefits, the how. There's an implementation plan to frame expectations and build enthusiasm. And then finally, who. The primary beneficiaries are identified, and we've made an early introduction plan for them, if possible, if appropriate. And finally, on the when, the delivery timeline is established. So just a great way to get your customer in the mindset that this deal is coming in, and we need to start planning for these things to ensure for a successful implementation of said product or solution. So I love this template, Mike, and I know you made a lot of effort or put a lot of effort into this. So I think this is really valuable. Beyond that, in the spirit of being as tactical as possible, which we know has been the goal from this series from the jump, you and I went out and actually talked to some challenger sellers and said, hey, give us your perspective. We're going to have, arguably, 800 to 1,000 sellers on the phone in the last major selling month of the year. What would you tell them? And these are a few of the items that we heard from them. So I just want to quickly run through these. I'm going to go lightning fast if I can. Include the annual cost of the problem your solution is set to fix in all follow-up conversation or communication. Love that. Paying a same versus paying a change. Absolutely. Second, confirm expected delivery date of the service and reverse engineer our steps to reach it. Something we talked about in our last webinar. Absolutely. And you see here in the bullet, send an updated project plan for each week it pushes back, demonstrating the cost of delay. What a great perspective to really teach the customer. Yeah, and show what that actually is costing them. Absolutely. This third one, relating to hygiene, confirm you've included deadlines and contingencies in statements of work or LOAs. I love this one. I think when I talk to a lot of those commercial leaders or challenger sellers, they shared, obviously it feels like a lot of folks, leave this out and aren't as keen to this as they could be. So what a great reminder for us with 1 month left to go in the year to ensure that our LOAs and statements of work are reflective of this. And then these last two I'll hit on real quick. Draft an email for your mobilizer to send to the signee, proactively address potential objections, and set a deadline. Obviously doing that respectfully and empathetically, but I love that one. And then fifth and finally, schedule a 15-minute meeting backstop on the day before a contract is due to hold our stakeholder accountable. God, I love that one. Who hasn't been chased down on a Friday by their head of sales, by their CFO saying, hey, you told me this deal was coming in. What's the latest from the customer? And you don't want to tell them, I don't know, I haven't talked to him this week.
It doesn't guarantee they're going to,
show up.
hold to it, but it's there. They see it, and there should be some sort of reaction to it one way or the other.
And if the deal comes in, we don't need it, we can cancel it. But what a great way to do some teaching and taking control with our customers. So I love these. And what I would ask for folks that are listening, that are dialed in, let us know in the chat. You've got a few hundred of your peers on the line. What's your guidance? What's your best practice? How do you bring deals in on time? Would love to source some of those, and we'll be sure to call them out and maybe some of the Q&A here, Mike.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Wow. Lightning fast. So to really land the plane on this one, what is available to all of our Challenger activation clients on the Challenger portal? Excuse me, a few really exciting options that I want to just quickly touch on. First and foremost, our first in a series of 4 brand new e-learnings on negotiations. This one on uncovering customer need. I've done this one myself twice, Mike. That's a humble brag. So if you're keeping score, just go ahead and make a note for me.
Did you do better the second time? Or?
Oh, it was. I mean, in all seriousness, it took me 20 minutes. I loved it. Real focus on asking the better questions.
Yep.
That I promise you, if you spend 20 minutes to do this, it will pay dividends for you before the end of the year. And I think in the spirit of being respectful to our commercial leaders that are listening, maybe we ask that you complete this outside of the prime dialing or work hours that could be spent customer facing, but find some time for this outside, just 20 minutes. It will be well worth your time. And the second piece there to really support the tactical execution of this is the latest in our Challenger activation playbook, tempo playbooks, Plan to Close, which is launching on Friday, 12.4 that I know the product team has been very hard at work on, which we're really excited about. The third in the series here, Engage and Manage, are already live, plan to close, as well as the concession. I do this for a living, Mike, I swear.
The concession
strategy template, yes, that you walk through is going to be available for all Challenger Activation clients as well.
The and I'll just reminder, like those tempo playbooks are super tactical and really focused on getting things done in the day-to-day. So if you haven't checked out a couple of the other ones that we've already put out, Engage, Manage, Plan to Close is going to have all the things in there that we've kind of teed up here: the concession evaluation template, the strategy template, some videos and instruction, more resources to download. So check it out.
Awesome. And then finally, one more in our Winning the Challenger Sales series, January 5th, Grow Accounts Through Commercial Teaching. Can't wait to see you all there. With that, let's take some questions.
All righty.